So next up we have two different approaches to implementing CRM applications from different institutions. So up first we've got Lauren Wagstaff, who's a business improvement manager from Sheffield Hallam University. And then up second is James Lee, who's a CRM systems manager, and Chrissy Felthouse, who's a senior IT project manager at the University of Derby. They've got quite a lot to squeeze into their session, so it's going to be a whistle-stop tour. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'll just wait for everybody to settle down a little bit. Where's the clicker? Thank you. Make sure it works. Yep. Hold on. There we go. Okay. Hopefully that's given you time to settle yourselves down. Like was said, my name's Lauren Wagstaff. I'm Business Improvement Manager at Sheffield Hallam University. And I'm really excited to be talking to you today. Thank you. About our journey through our implementation of CRM. We took a proof of concept approach. My colleagues from Derby will be talking you through their approach to implementing their CRM. Like we just said, it is going to be a bit of a whistle stop, so apologies, I'm going to talk really quick, and that's just in full disclosure, because I want to be able to take you through the full journey. So this is our standard slide that we take to all of our events. And really, I'm not going to linger on this because essentially all you need to know is that we're big at Sheffield Hallam. 700 courses, fourth highest undergraduate recruiter. So we've got, lots going on. What these slides don't show, though, is the sort of the fact that we are currently involved in the implementation of a sort of 2-year strategy. It's our ambition to become the world's leading applied university. And if anybody saw the speech yesterday from Jerry McCormack, similarly the statement is less important really than the intention, in as much as that has a lot to do with the context in which we were working when we were implementing B2B CRM, because that need to be able to sort of become the world's leading applied university meant that actually there was a real focus on the applied curriculum, so things like apprenticeships, placements, graduate opportunities became much more important, so that will tie in later. So just a little bit more about our context. We were working, I sort of came onto the project on the back of a history of unsuccessful CRM implementations, to say the least. There was lots and lots of reasons for that, but sort of to summarise at high level, there was lack of strategic and project level direction, so we lacked the, those projects were managed at a local level, often without any project or system delivery specialists working on those projects. So that was one of the reasons why they were unsuccessful. Equally, because they didn't have those specialists, the areas didn't have much vision in terms of how they wanted to use the system, so they were basically lifting and shifting poor processes, which made the requirements really complicated, and really the user experience at the end of that was just unacceptable, so the systems were never adopted. So that sort of explains a little bit about the context, and as a result of the failed implementations, but equally this new strategy we were moving towards, we started to see a change in behaviour in terms of the requests for support. So late 2016, we were starting to see requests from sort of a bottom-up approach from departments across the university who identified a need to be able to better manage their B2B relationships. That meant that actually that's when I came on board, because working with closely with the CIO, we were sort of commissioned just to do a bit of investigation work. So I worked with a lot of different areas across the university that were all expressing this need, to be able to identify what their requirements were, whether or not they were sort of the same, and could be one solution would be able to satisfy all of those needs. After a sort of a period of being able to weed out people who genuinely did need a CRM system, but also to work out, who did have common needs. We did identify sort of 4 major areas across the university that would benefit from the implementation of a CRM system. So working closely with the CIO at the time, we identified that that was the way forward we wanted to go, and that's when we initiated the project. So then we had to decide about, how we were actually going to do this. And again, going back to the context, we were working off the back of all of these failed projects. Equally though, we knew that we had really straightforward and simple requirements. We were in the luxury position of not having to deal with any legacy CRM systems, which meant that we were really able to sort of think pragmatically about how we resolved it, and we could keep it at that simple level. So regardless of, we had lots of boring conversations about whether or not it was a pilot or whether or not it was a proof of concept, but regardless of that, we knew that we wanted to do it out of the box to avoid that complexity that we suffered from before. We wanted to do it under the procurement threshold for various reasons, which I won't go into. And also, we knew that we didn't have, from previous attempts, we knew we didn't have the in-house experience to be able to support the implementation. So we knew we needed to engage with an external supplier. So just a few things about why we actually ended up going with the proof of concept. I've kind of explained that, but just in a little bit more detail. There were sort of 2 aspects to that, really. From a business point of view, it made sense to do a sort of limited rollout, and in that sense it kind of was like a pilot, because it meant that we could give the business early visualization of the product, but also identify and confront some of the organisational behaviours that were sort of becoming apparent from previous attempts at CRM. The out-of-the-box concept meant that it was we avoided all of that complexity, which then resulted in us being able to deliver quickly, a low risk, and it was hopefully going to be an inexpensive way to be able to provide real benefit to the business, but really quickly. So from the business point of view, those were sort of the reasons. From a technical perspective, it really was a proof of concept, because what we were hoping to achieve was to be able to test the implementation methodology, the scalability of any solution that we ended up with, how sustainable that solution was, how much it cost, whether or not it was easy to implement, and also how it fit within our architecture. And all of that was designed to inform the decision making for future sort of phases of work. So I'm going to skip through these bits quite quickly. They're all the information's on the slide, so I'm not going to labour over it, because actually once we got into the implementation, we decided that we needed to have some fairly straightforward success factors associated with the proof of concept, so we could identify whether or not we were successful at the end of that period. And again, keeping with the keep it simple theme, from a system point of view, we needed to fulfill the requirements and fit within our architecture. We wanted people to engage with it, and we knew that we needed to sort of think about how we were going to standardise the B2B processes across the university. So those were our measures. We worked, like I said before, with 4 areas across the university. One faculty out of 4, we have 4 faculties in the university, business development teams. The employment and education partnerships teams, so obviously that links in with the apprenticeships and graduate opportunities. Research and Innovation Office, who offer collaborative research and that kind of thing, so working with businesses, and then obviously corporate marketing. Equally, we ran a quite light ship in terms of project team. I worked then, transferred from doing the original business analysis work and sort of fulfilled a hybrid BA PM role. Another colleague filled out more of a systems and data analyst role. From each of the 4 areas that we were involved with, we had 1 SME that came on board for the project. And then later on down the line, we also engaged with an enterprise applications analyst from our digital technology services team to sort of help with that eventual transition, should that be the result of the proof of concept. Chrissy will go through a little bit more about the actual approach to this. I'm not going to labour on it too much, but this roughly describes our timeline. So like I said, it was late 2016 when we did that original requirements gathering exercise. And then sort of by the new year, we knew that we needed to enter into sort of negotiations with our partner. So we took from January to May to identify the partner, to sort of negotiate contracts and get those signed. So what we ended up with at the end of that was identifying that our partner was Crimson, Crimson Consultants, and also that we were going to be implementing Dynamics 365. That took us into the implementation period, so May, June, July was our implementation, largely roughly split into design, build and test. And then we had a 3-month run period where we sort of tested those, the measurements that went through before, the success criteria. And essentially this is what we ended up with, a really simple solution. It was made up of 5 entities and an add-in, which I was saying sounds like a weird 90s movie, but it's really straightforward. We had campaigns from a corporate marketing point of view, contacts an organisation to describe who it was that we were engaging with, products was what we sell or offer to those businesses, and the engagement wrapped that up in terms of who we were selling what to, and that's it. There was no integration, no process, no workflow. But through doing that plus the add-in, we managed to get some really, really tangible benefits. The most important one of those, I'm not going to go through all of them, but probably the most unexpected at least was around the fact that whilst the functionality was quite straightforward, what it also did was sort of provide a springboard for further discussions about how we could use CRM in the future that would never have happened if we hadn't have done this small scale implementation. So especially things around sort of key account management and how we were, from a strategic level, how we were going to do that as a university. So in terms of success, we did fulfill all of the requirements. It was easy to implement. Not that easy, obviously, but we did it in 3 months, which was you know, pretty unheard of in terms of how our implementations normally go at Sheffield Hallam. Equally, we engaged with 60 users, and through sort of doing some analytics on their usage, we knew that they were engaging regularly with the system. Equally, those 4 areas that I talked about were using the same process that we managed to sort of standardise from having the same old conversations as business analysts usually do about how different people's processes are and how they need to be very different. The system that we ended up with managed to sort of deal with that. So I've gone through that really quickly because I wanted to spend most time on going through our lessons learned. Hopefully I've sort of touched on a lot of them already, but lesson 1 is around the importance of supplier selection. If you, like us, identify that you don't have the in-house experience, then make sure that you invest the time and the sort of money, really, in finding an implementation partner that actually you're confident in. We sort of had conversations with various people who were happy, which was why it took 3 months, but it was worth it in the long run because then we only need to implement in 3 months. The technical expertise that we got from those implementation partners who'd previously done that, they'd tested the implementation approach, and also had experience in HE, was a key success factor in our success. Sorry. Equally, make sure that you've got an effective project team, especially if you're trying to deliver at the pace that we did. One of the main reasons why we were able to do that was because our project team, so the SMEs from each of those 4 areas, were uniquely senior compared to sort of other projects that we'd previously worked on. So they were all heads of their service. That meant that they were making decisions based on a vision rather than what they knew to be the case right now. So equally, they were in a position to make those decisions, so we didn't have to keep going backwards and forwards. And as a result of that, we could manage the project through with their quite light governance structures, should we put it that way, which meant that we could deliver at pace. So pragmatism was valued over bureaucracy in this case. Equally though, it links to our sort of third lesson. Whilst we definitely needed to do that in terms of how we managed had an effective project team, what we also kind of missed on the back of that is because we didn't have the full governance of a standard project in place, we wasted time later on down the line in terms of identifying a senior business owner for the product. So actually when we did find out it was a success and we wanted to roll it out further, we had to then backtrack and try and get engagement with those senior business owners to be able to sort of support it. So regardless of whether or not you're doing a proof of concept, I guess just remember to make sure that you've got senior buy-in to be able to sort of future-proof it. The next point is around delivering at pace, so I've sort of touched on that quite a bit. The only reason, well, one of the main reasons why we were able to do that is because we started off with a really, really airtight scope with really well-defined requirements, and that was really well communicated to the people that we were implementing it for. We ended up with a massive backlog of things that people wanted, but we had to be quite strict in terms of making sure that scope wasn't sort of swayed from. That meant that I had to be quite strict and stubborn at times, but it was all about managing expectations of the stakeholders that were involved, so that was really important. Equally, the pace that we achieved was, because it was 3 months, we were able to keep those senior stakeholders engaged for that 3-month period, because they could sort of see the end of the light at the end of the tunnel. If it had been for a longer period of time, I don't think they would have committed to at the same level. So it's something to bear in mind that for a short period of time this worked, but for a longer period of time we would have had to have thought of a different way of managing the project. Lesson 5, data. It's no joke. We moved information from 4 different sources into the CRM system, and it was a static data feed. There were no integrations, nothing else involved, but it took our sort of analyst full-time 3 months to be able to do that, and that was with support from our implementation partners, sporadic use of sort of contractors to sort of beef up that resource. And that's something that whilst we were aware that that needed to be done and that it was going to be a big job, we totally underestimated the skills, but also the time involved. So if we were to do that again, I think because we don't have any people that specifically look at our data, we probably would have resourced that differently if we'd have done it again. And then the last 2 sort of link together and probably lead quite nicely onto the future of where we were getting to. We were working with what was the Coalition of the Willing. They really were engaged with the project, and as a result of that, we kind of made the assumption that the standard training and support would be adequate, and that because they knew what the rationale was, and they'd been brought on the journey, that we didn't need to spend too much time on that. That was not the case, because even though they'd been involved in that process, to be able to move from having very sort of haphazard processes, shall we say, to a proper CRM system actually took a lot of support from the project team to provide that at-elbow support to try and embed that engagement within the business. So regardless of how engaged they are, I mean, we tried lots of different ways to incentivize people to use the system. So we had super users, we published statistics on usage throughout the period. So people, there was like a hall of fame of who was using the system most. But regardless of all of that, they still needed a lot of support. So don't underestimate the amount of support. There's definitely more work to be done here, going sort of back to who's using it already, but equally going forward as well in the next phase of work. But that links on to the last point, lesson 7. What we did, because of the scope and because of the time periods, and we focused on the operational implementation of our CRM system, which was right for the time, but the effect of that was that we hadn't identified our senior exec level users of CRM as separate the operational areas were sort of we were concentrating on the transactional login of information, but actually we hadn't shown how that information could be used to drive decision making at an exec level. And we're hoping that going forward, that was definitely a lesson that we need to do that better next time, but we're hoping that if we can work on that going forward, that will also help the business engagement at an operational level, because then there'll be actual customers of the data that's going into the system, which will then sort of drive engagement across the board. So hopefully that all makes sense. I'm not going to through it too quickly. To the future, based on all of that, again, I'm not going to labour this. This is as a result of the success of the proof of concept, we moved into a full-scale implementation, enterprise-wide implementation of CRM. And these are our sort of focuses for the next year, I guess. So I handed over the project to a different project manager at this point when we moved into this phase of work. And I asked her recently how she thought the proof of concept helped with this. And she sort of said two things really. The lessons that I've just gone through with you quickly really helped in terms of identifying the approach to the larger scale piece of work. But the main thing really that has benefited the enterprise-wide implementation is that it's reduced the barriers to implementation from an exec level. So there's reassurance, having done this already, that we're using a recommended product that we know works in our sort of environments. We're using a partner that we know we've worked with before successfully, but equally we've already tested the approach and we know what pace we can expect. So that helped to get the exec level buy-in to actually invest the time, energy and money to be able to do this full level rollout. So we'll see what's in line for the future, but for now that's the end of our journey. So thank you very much. I'm just going to hand over to my colleagues from Derby.
Thank you very much, Lauren. So like Lauren said, I'm going to talk briefly about how our CRM implementation went around enterprise-wide approach. Before I do, just a quick introduction. So my name's James Lee. I'm the CRM System Support and Development Manager at University of Derby, based in IT Services. And I look after the functional support team of 3 within that area. My colleague Chrissy Feldhaus, Senior IT Project Manager. Chrissy is the Project Manager for CRM, so she kind of runs the show. Okay, I know a lot of universities are sticking up the kind of introductory fact and figure slide. Again, not going to dwell on this. And we've gone a slightly different route in terms of some of the achievements and outcomes we've done in the last 12 to 18 months. So obviously if you want to look at this, by all means the presentation will go out later, but due to time constraints we're just going to skip over that for now. So what I'll start with is kind of a walkthrough of our journey leading up to our current implementation of MS Dynamics. So 4-year implementation. Back in 2012 we chose the product, and that product was PeopleSoft CRM on-premise. At the time it made sense to choose that product. We already had 2 of their verticals installed within the institution. That was their student record system, PeopleSoft Campus Solutions, but also their finance product, PeopleSoft Finance. Users were familiar with those products. There was a discounted cost attributed to the PeopleSoft CRM product because we already had the other 2 installed. And also at the time, we just assumed that the integrations would be quite straightforward because, again, the products were related to one another. At the same time, we established the project team, but again, that was quite limited. So that comprised of a business analyst and a PeopleSoft developer, both based in IT services. Around that, strategic objectives were set. Again, these were quite narrow. These were based on limited consultation with marketing. So those 3 strategic objectives set around 2012 were events management, email marketing campaigns, but also an imports process for our prospective students. And from there was a series of functionality investigation, again undertaken predominantly by the project team, so again very limited. It was a BA essentially and a PeopleSoft developer working on that investigation, and it was felt that in order to get this, actually accelerate the timeline for the project, we needed to recruit additional resource in. So in March of 2014, additional money was found to actually bring in a functional support team within marketing, comprising of myself as the manager, but also, like I said at the start of the presentation, three CRM system officers. So we took the time to investigate those 3 key areas where the strategic objectives have been formulated. And again, we found difficulty in terms of the out-of-the-box capability, but also when we showcased that functionality to users, they didn't particularly like it, it didn't meet requirements, and so the attempted system rollout was met with only very, very limited success. As a result, in, I think, autumn of 2016, the decision was actually to move on and look at alternatives moving away from that PeopleSoft system. So as part of that initial journey, leading up until the autumn of 2016, we took away various lessons. I've just put up 5 takeaways there. So as mentioned previously, the actual resource around the project team was quite small. We had a small number of stakeholders because the strategic objectives were predominantly marketing driven. But we did have an exec sponsor, but the problem is that exec sponsor tended to change on quite a regular basis. And obviously that was problematic for us in terms of each individual exec member had their own kind of priority list in what they thought was important. But that created issues for us in terms of inconsistent messages to the business, because we were working on one thing and then we shifted goalposts and started working on something else. Alongside that, we required a project manager. There was no official project manager as part of this. So again, in terms of accountability and responsibility for the project, there wasn't anything. So when the project started to go a bit awry, a bit wrong, there wasn't that accountability in place for that. Involve stakeholders from the outset. So as we talked, we've gone enterprise-wide this time. It was more limited last time. So we didn't have a lot of people involved with the decision-making around tenders, picking the products, building in governance frameworks, etc. So that was always an uphill battle. As I said, building a strong governance framework, so roles and responsibilities not really defined at the start. So again, getting that buy-in, getting that engagement, getting people to kind of almost do what you want them to do was always an uphill battle. And one thing we've learned also the hard way is don't always look to be a pioneer. So it's great if you can bring in a piece of software that no one's using in the sector. You can try and be really, really innovative. But I think more often than not, the better option would be to look to buy something in that you know is reliable, that you know is established in HE, embed it, get users engaged, and then look to potentially be innovative. And that is something we are hoping to do with Dynamics. So to talk about Dynamics, and I'm going to hand over to Chrissy.
Hi everyone. So as James explained, we'd gone through around 4 or 5 years of what could only be described as pain in terms of CRM. In fact, CRM became a swear word almost at Derby. If you said it, people either grimaced or sort of cringed, and no one really thought it was ever going to happen. So back in 2016, we were given the go-ahead, end of 2016, the go-ahead to replace CRM and look for a new product. Now, we knew that because of financial regulations and expenditure, we would have to look at a tender process. However, for those that have been through an ODU tender, it can be very, very lengthy. It can be quite painful at times. So we decided to go down the G-Cloud route. So that meant we still did a competitive process, but it was slightly easier in terms of managing the terms and conditions and the contracts. So we had 4 shortlisted suppliers, which was actually 3 different systems, but with 4 different partners. And the winning partner was Crimson Consultants with Microsoft Dynamics. Following that, back in around September, October last year, we actually awarded and started to get things moving. And I'm pleased to say that since then we've had a fantastic year as far as CRM is concerned. One of the main reasons is the fact that it's tailored to higher education. So something that we'd learnt over the pain previously with CRM, it was a very corporate system meant for the commercial market, didn't really sit well in terms of the university and HE, whereas the product that we were able to work with Crimson on is very much tailored to higher education. So we think that's one of the reasons we've had such success. So the very first thing we did back in towards the end of 2017 was establish a program board. and that was to directly sort out the lesson learned previously around governance. So because of the size and scope of the implementation that we were facing, we decided setting up a program board was the best way so that we could run it as a lengthy program with different phases and have consistent governance above that. First thing we did was appoint our Pro-Vice Chancellor of External Affairs as our program sponsor. So she has sat with us for the last 12 months, helping to plan out the phases of implementation and which way we're going, the strategic direction. The rest of the board is made up of deans, directors, heads of department. Our director of IT is our deputy program chair, with myself as program manager. And the deans and directors, they've all taken on the role of business change lead. So there is strong agreement there between ourselves, the project team, and the business leads that they are responsible for delivering the benefit. We deliver the capability, they are accountable and responsible for the benefits. And that's in our terms of reference. And that's ensured that we've got their engagement and buy-in from day one. Another role that we created was the responsible change owner. So these are the lower level staff, admin assistants that are on the ground doing the day-to-day work. They've been empowered to work with us through the project alongside their everyday jobs. They're in a way super users. They form part of the project working group throughout the actual implementation, but then they will carry on that role as responsible change owner for their team, promoting the CRM system across their different departments, liaising together sort of every month around what wins they've had, whether they found better ways of using the system, are there any pain points that they're having, and potential future enhancements. And that team we've now had in place for around 12 months, and they will grow with the more phases that we release. But so far that's worked really, really well for us, especially in getting that wider engagement and wider adoption. So in less than 6 months, we were able to roll out to our admissions team, our international department, our student services, our marketing team, and also our University of Derby online team. But since that initial rollout, I would say probably every week, if not every month, we're getting more and more teams come to us and ask if they can now get on board with the existing live functionality. So that just goes to show the hard work the responsible changers are doing in promoting it is definitely working, and it's getting that engagement across the board. So in terms of the approach that we've taken, this is something that Crimson have helped us through. We've done this from a program level and at a project level. So the very first thing we did was have a diagnostics phase. So Crimson came in and met with all of the teams and departments across the university back in December 2017, basically to understand what it is that they do day to day, what are their pain points, what works really well for them, what doesn't, and how do they think a CRM system could help. They put together a diagnostic plan for us, which was a suggested phased approach for implementing Dynamics with the different accelerators. The board signed off on that, and we then went into each project. And each project goes through the definition phase, the design. We do a product familiarization session with the users first so they can see how it works out of the box. We then do the lower level requirements gathering, designs and development, and then into UAT and rollout. And that's worked really well today. Like I said, it's been a fantastic 12 months for us. We never thought we'd get as far as we have. And I will hand back over to James to go through in a bit more detail the early successes. Thank you.
Okay, so we've just stuck a few stats there up on screen. I know everyone loves some good stats. So inquiry management was the first phase. So as you can see, so far, since we took it live in April, we've had almost 8,500. And their inquiries, like Chris said, predominantly from our applicants or prospects, taken either through email, walk-ins or phone calls. Case management, similar concept, that's just students. And recently we've also using the Microsoft portal that houses a inquiry form on our website, as well as upcoming the prospectus order form. Any inquiries that come through that portal are sent to a newly recruited central inquiry team within the university, and they basically answer those queries or triage them to the appropriate team. That portal has been live for about a month now, and so far we've picked up 500 inquiries through that route. Total number of users since we went live in April, again almost touching 100, which is very pleasing. And we also have a number of mailboxes operating in Dynamics. So those were mailboxes previously that have been used within Outlook to manage inquiries. They are now been placed in Dynamics, and we're using a queue setup to manage inquiries that come through. Not going to dwell too much on this, but this is kind of phase 2, a bit more breakdown in terms of what we are going to be looking at for phase 2. So a lot to get through there, and I know the actual timeframes are quite aggressive in terms of we're looking for May 2019 rollout. So again, like phase 1, we may look to phase various elements of this. And finally, following conclusion of phase 1 in the next couple of weeks, we have already started to do lessons learned. I'll just run through some of these. So agile delivery was crucial in terms of delivering business benefits to the user base much quicker, hence why we broke it down into 3 separate chunks, 1A, 1B, 1C. Always allow a bit more time for integrations, because we initially scheduled 6 weeks, but obviously due to various technical questions around potentially not having a field we wanted to take across from our student record system into Dynamics, we had to create those, or questions in terms of what was the most appropriate area in Dynamics to map a particular field to. That ended up taking up around 3 months. Allow flexibility in user adoption, so we don't force everyone to come on at once. We tend to be quite flexible to allow people to come on when potentially it's not a busy period, or if they need to, say, review their business processes to work out how best to adapt the system to the way they work and operate. Positive advocates are the best route to success. So as you can see, we've had quite a high level of rollout in terms of number of inquiries logged. That creates quite a positive impression of the system. People talk to one another in different departments, and as soon as people hear of some of the benefits that Dynamics can deliver, they kind of want to get on board. So again, those teams that were kind of out of scope for phase 1 initially have come on board based on the fact that they've heard good things from departments who are using the product. Unfortunately, that does come at a cost, financial cost. So obviously, we've been quite fortunate in terms of our budget being quite flexible. So in terms of us being able to increase the number of licenses for users, we've been able to do that. And obviously, the more people we bring on board, the more storage space that takes up. So again, we've already had to expand our storage space kind of 5 months into rollout. And finally, the thing probably we don't do enough of is celebrate success. Often we are so focused on just moving to the next stage of the project. We don't always take stock, kind of celebrate what we've achieved. So it's always nice coming to conferences like this and get asked to present on what we've achieved, and hopefully you can take something away from this presentation today. And with that, I'll say thank you very much, and if we've got time, take any questions.
So thank you very much to Lauren, James and Chrissy. Do we have any questions? Any questions? Got one here.
Hi. Obviously, this change from up to 2016 and beyond that has been partly the way you've approached change. And I just wondered whether that new approach to change is now being transitioned out across other projects across the university.
I would say for us it is, yeah. So we have a portfolio office in our team, and the approach that we've taken with CRM, we have adopted that across our business intelligence program as well. So we've done similar things. The responsible change owners is something we'll take forward with any project. So yeah.
Thank you. Back somewhere.
Hi, I'm Ellie from the University of the West of England. Did you have to decommission any old systems in the project as well, or were there parallel runnings of systems? Because you mentioned the adoption was flexible.
It was. No, one of the problems with the old CRM system is because it didn't really meet requirements, and because users didn't really get on with the product, we had limited uptake in the first place. So I think in terms of regular users of our old system, it was literally just our online arm. And in terms of what we were doing, because we were able to produce queries, the way they were able to extract their data, put it on a spreadsheet, and then store it up until the point where they were ready to come on board with Dynamics. Because the problem we had as well, alongside kind of transitioning off the old system, we had GDPR come in, and in terms of actually being able to reflect those GDPR preferences in our PeopleSoft CRM system, there was a reluctance to do the development work on the basis that it was phasing out, and because we couldn't reflect that in the system, we ended up having to hold that information outside. So no, there was no parallel running on the basis that we didn't have many users, and yeah, in terms of development that was needed to keep them on board, we weren't willing to do it.
For one more, if there's any more. Any more questions? Oh, okay.
We've had some mixed success with suppliers offering us an accelerator, which has later transpired to be effectively their IP. When we've rolled out and then tried to later configure that solution and extend it, it's required, you know, call off an additional professional services from that supplier. Are you fully independent now in terms of your ongoing rollout, or have you got similar issues in terms of the IP and of that accelerator?
I say we're not fully independent as yet because we're continuing to work with Crimson over the next year to 18 months. The programme that we've got is a full 2-year programme of different projects and phases. So we're still very much working with them. But the areas that we have released, yes, that is being managed by our internal CRM team. The only parts that we're still partnering with Crimson on is the future phases. So yeah, it's a little from column A, a little from column B at the moment. But happy to talk more about it if it helps.
Okay, so thank you very much to all our speakers this morning. We've got a great lineup of institutions